In today's video, I want to discuss something any real audiophile should be able to do, and that is being able to distinguish lossy versus lossless audio in a blind ABX test. Now, I'm pretty sure anyone can technically hear the difference between lossy and lossless audio, but whether or not they can perceive it depends on their listening ability. To be able to successfully pass a blind ABX test between lossy and lossless audio, you need to activate your ear's DLC expansion pack. You need to fundamentally understand how things are supposed to sound and be fully in tune with your eardrums and inner ear hair cells. If your brain isn't actually able to process the information your inner ear hair cells gather, you will not be able to pass these tests. So Jisoo from Blackpink released a song called All Eyes on Me in her latest single, and while listening to the song I was like, wow, this song is very high detail, why don't I just blind ABX this versus 320 kilobits per second MP3? So here we have my results for layman coded 320 kilobits per second MP3 using Audacity, comparing it to the original lossless file, and I'm able to get 10 out of 10, 99.9% confidence interval, meaning that there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that this was by luck, and I'll take that chance, of course. So, what do you actually need to listen for in these tests? Firstly, the dynamic range in a lossy file will be lower than it is in a lossless file. So even for a pure vocal section, what I recommend you do is, in the ABX software, whether you're using Lossinato or Foobar ABX tool, I'll link both of these in the description, put the start time for the file right before the singer begins singing, and manually stop the track with your spacebar. It is important to do these tests correctly because your echoic memory is pretty low, so knowing how to do these correctly will determine whether or not you actually pass these tests, even if you can hear the difference. So after you've heard them sing in the lossless file for a reference, press the X, which is the one you're trying to guess which is either A or B. So after you've heard X and you're sure, pick an option. If you're not entirely sure, go back to A and B and compare them to X, and once you are, you can make a decision. So on this song, for example, with the lossy file, it's like the soundstage is compressed and her vocal is not peaking as clearly and as naturally as it is in the lossless version. It's like there's a wall of sound with the 320 kilobits per second version versus the lossless file. It's audibly compressed. So yeah, that's something you should be able to pick up, and this won't necessarily come across as an artifact, but in different lossy versus lossless files, you'll be able to detect this, and I'll mention that right here. So here we have 500 kilobits per second OGG Vorbis, and I believe Spotify uses 320 kilobits per second OGG Vorbis for their desktop premium version, and I got 13 out of 15, and the way I really determine the difference in this is that the decay of a symbol on the lossy version, or the 500 kilobits per second OGG Vorbis version, had like this weird artifact to it, so the decay wasn't natural, versus on the lossless it sounded like a real instrument decaying naturally. And yeah, that was the problem with the 500 kilobits per second OGG Vorbis one. So in my headphone mastery guide, I said that I hadn't been able to blind ABX lossless versus Opus, and that was true at the time. I never successfully blind ABX this, but the last time I tried this was like over a year ago and was on a different song. But I found a particularly high dynamic range song and was like, why don't I just test this versus lossless now with Opus, because yeah, it's been a while, maybe I'll be able to hear a difference. So I used the default settings in Audacity for Opus, which is 256 kilobits per second, compression of 10 and whatever. So I blind ABX that versus lossless in a particularly high dynamic range section or high crest factor section, and was able to get 10 out of 10. The dynamic range on the Opus file was audibly lacking compared to the lossless file. Interestingly though, when I ABX this same song with AAC versus lossless, the AAC version didn't necessarily sound like the dynamic range was as lacking, but I could hear artifacts in the treble that were not present on Opus. But yeah, so I guess the differences between lossy codecs are going to differ, but the highest fidelity one audibly is always going to be lossless. So I was able to blind ABX all of the common lossy formats, and I'm pretty sure I can for any of them. Not all sections of all songs will I be able to hear differences between lossy and lossless, but for most songs I can tell a difference, and at the end of the day I might as well just listen to lossless instead of like saving a little bit of file space, right? So yeah, The reason I think it's important for any audiophile to be able to tell the difference between these is that there are a lot of skeptics out there that claim you can't tell the difference between these lossy codecs and lossless, and as I've shown in this video, I clearly can, and most real audiophiles I know have been able to demonstrate that they can hear a difference between lossy and lossless. And having the gear is one thing, and having the listening ability is another. You need both to be a real audiophile. You can't just have good gear and not have any listening ability. That just makes you a music enjoyer, I guess, or something. I don't know. But to be a real audiophile, you need good listening ability and good audio gear. In addition, lossless audio is one of the cornerstones of high fidelity audio. How can you be listening to lossy audio and call yourself an audiophile? I mean, we want high resolution sound, and lossless audio is that. And you also need to be able to perceive the differences between lossy and lossless audio to prove that you can actually tell the difference. From the Patreon, I'd like to give a shout out to Yuli, Felix, Malbill, Christopher Yu, the RFL Reaper, Tripped, Munolo, Scabby D, Fofo. From the YouTube membership, I'd like to give a shout out to Castelo4141, Ninja Comet 3, Vsauce4, Waytaker, and Snivery. From the Discord server, I'd like to give a shout out to Tripped once again and Base Gamer. Thank you guys for supporting the channel. Be sure to join the Apple House Sound Discord server if you haven't. I'll see you guys next time. I'm out.